I'm not ashamed to own my Lord, nor to defend his cause. Maintain the honors of his word, the glory of his cross.
Well, last Sunday, we were looking at some of what our writer calls designs by God of how he brought trials on different people. We looked at Abraham. Remember Abraham, that was a direct command. God had told Abraham to gather up his belongings, to leave his land, and go to a place that God was going to show him. And then Job. Job, I guess we didn't look at completely. Job 1. I'll get Job chapter 1 and verse 12. Maybe Jared, we'll start up with you on that one.
And the Lord said to Satan, Behold, all that he has is in your power, only do not lay a hand on his person.
Okay, and then chapter 2 is chapter 2 and verse 12.
6, 12.
Oh yeah, he 2 and 6, sorry, 2 and 6.
You want me to get it?
Yeah, okay, it's the same idea.
And the Lord said to Satan, Behold, he is in your hand, but spare his life.
Okay, so God is allowing who to challenge Job here?
Satan.
The which?
Satan.
Yes, yeah. So we see that God's permitted Satan to put Job to this trial. And also with Job, I thought it's interesting that his friends, Job's friends, remember Eliphaz and Bildad and Zophar, they also challenged Job, didn't they, in a way, because of their thinking and their seeing. And his wife. Yeah, well, his wife gave him the biggest challenge almost. Yeah. Well, she told me to give up on God, didn't she? So having thought that, if you look at Luke chapter 8 and verse 33, I thought we'd point this out, that before Christ died upon Calvary, demons were in society at that time. God allowed demons to give people trials, to be in them, but he done that for what reason? What was the main reason of all that? If you look at 33, just the only point I wanted to make there was the fact that demons were in man. But why did God allow that at that time? Right, to show Jesus' power. Right, to show Jesus' power that he could remove them. But now, does God allow that in our day and age?
All that was nailed to the cross.
The which?
All that was nailed to the cross in Colossians 2.
Yeah. And Zechariah said that demons don't possess men today.
Right.
God had, just as we see in Job, God can restrain Satan. He can restrain demons.
Yes.
Now that does not mean that Satan doesn't work in this world today. And I don't believe that means demons don't work in this world today.
Right.
But they don't work this way.
Right. Right. The point then we'll take from that, kind of where I was heading, was you're right, Satan works in our day and age. And his angels, demons, work in our age. But 1 Corinthians 10 and 13 tells us something that we should know. 1 Corinthians 10 and 13. Gord, I'll let you read that.
Corinthians 10 and 13.
Yes, please.
No temptation has overtaken you except such as is common to man. But God is faithful, who will not allow you to be tempted beyond what you are able, but with the temptation will also make the way of escape that you may be able to bear it.
Okay, thanks. So the point I wanted us to see here was what we read in Luke. Those demons overpowered people at that time when God allowed it, and it took Christ to remove that demon. And as Jeremy pointed out, Satan works in our day and age. His angels work in our day and age, but we have control over what they can do to us. And Gord has pointed that out in this verse. God will make an escape for us. Okay?
Even since sin entered the world, there was a way of escaping from sin and temptation. Look at Joseph.
Right.
How many times was he tempted? Potiphar's wife. He left fleeing naked. There was a way for him to escape. Yeah, he had to go out naked and run away, but there was a way of escape.
Right. That's right. Oh, yes. And we'll see that with Daniel when we look into him quickly. But the point I was just making, though, when God allowed demons to overtake people, that was for the ability for Christ to show that He could remove them from the people. But no, the ones that didn't have demons, we think of Daniel. He had the power to overcome what he was challenged with.
Even the demons recognized Jesus' power.
Yes.
Because the demons asked Jesus to cast them into the herd. Right?
Right.
So they knew that Jesus had this power to cast them out.
Right. Yeah, I didn't want us to get into the demons a whole lot, only just to show the point that we have an escape, okay, when trials come upon us. Few in the Bible that were overcome by Satan didn't have, and that was for the purpose of Christ. But yes, with Job, with all the biblical characters, they had the power to overcome, but it had to be their desire to do that. And we see that with Daniel. Daniel 6, and John, I'll get you still in Daniel 6? Or did you leave Daniel 6? Oh, okay, Daniel 6, and you read verses 16 and 17 in Daniel 6.
Then the king commanded, and they brought Daniel and cast him into the den of lions. How the king spoke and said to Daniel, the God whom you serve continually, he will deliver him. And a stone was brought and laid upon the mouth of the den, and the king sealed with his own sign and with the sign of his Lord, that the purpose might not be changed considering Daniel.
Okay, and Carla, do you want to read 18 to 19 of Daniel 6?
Then the king went off to his palace and spent the night fasting, and no entertainment was brought before him, and his sleep fled from him. Then the king arose at dawn, at the break of day, and went in haste to the lion's den.
And Jeff, do you want to read 20 and 21?
When he came to the den, he cried out with a lamenting voice to Daniel. The king spoke, saying to Daniel, Daniel, servant of the living God, that you are God, whom you serve continually, and been able to deliver you from the lion. And Daniel said to the king, Hope is live forever.
And Tammy, 22 and 23.
And God sent his angel and shut the lion's mouths, so that they had not hurt me, because I was found innocent before him. And also, O king, I have done no wrong before you. Now the king was exceedingly glad for him, and commanded that they should take Daniel up out of the den. So Daniel was taken up out of the den, and no shadow was found on him, because he believed in his God.
Okay. I think the point our writer's trying to make here is that, like Daniel, trials are going to arise in our lives. And we see Daniel here, when you think Daniel had a high position in the kingdom, and yet he wasn't free of trials, and he accepted the trials that he was faced with here, so there was a consequence, wasn't there? And that was him being thrown into the lion's den. But we see that God was faithful, and we know the story. But the story is for our purpose, that, trials are going to happen to us. We may not be thrown into a lion's den, but we must remain faithful in our duties and our obligations as Christians. I believe that's the point that he's trying to make. And that word fidelity, that's not a word we use a lot now in preaching in this age, but it just simply means faithfulness. Faithfulness in our discharge of our faithfulness, of our duties, of our obligations. So I believe that's the point he's making there. So as we move on then, we think of trials, and we might be tempted to think, well, are they really of value to us? I'm a Christian. I uphold my faithfulness. I do my best. Or do we consider them stress then to us? Would we rather live without spiritual trials? So we're going to look at some of the values of our spiritual trials that we may be overlooking. And the first is they manifest that we are God's children. Hebrews, where are we? Henry, do you want to look up Hebrews? Hebrews chapter 12 and verse 6.
For whom the Lord allow the chastenings, and scourge you every sound for every sin.
Okay. What is this verse telling us?
Well, chastening, it proves that God loves us. It's like your kids. You discipline your kids growing up. It's not because you're mean. It's because you love them. You want them to do what is right.
Right.
If you didn't love them, you wouldn't chasten your kids.
That's right. He corrects us, same as a father does to a son that he loves, doesn't he? And he doesn't correct if it's not necessary, does he? And when trials arise, we should be assured then, shouldn't we, that God loves us. If we profess to be God's children, then should we not accept the trials? Accept them with that attitude? I'm not sure where I had manifest. I'm not sure if there's a version that had that. I must have had another verse.
Manifest, probably an older version.
Yeah, but it must have been. But in whatever version I had spotted that, it's simply used in its verb form. And it means to make evident or certain by showing or displaying. And when I read that, I thought, okay, this verse is telling us that God's displaying His love for us. He's showing His love for us in our correction. But on the flip side of the trial, by accepting it faithfully, don't we show God, or don't we manifest to God that we are His children, and that we desire His correction, that we desire for Him to know that that we understand what He is doing and why He is doing that? And to me, that should be encouragement to us, shouldn't it? Knowing that God sees that, and knowing that we are trying to emanate that thought back to God. I don't know if anyone else had a thought on that, but also then the value of trials, they develop patience, don't they? James chapter 1. James chapter 1, I'll give that to you, Lisa. James chapter 1 and verse 3. And Romans 5. I'll come up here to you, Tim. Romans 5 and verses 3 to 6. So James 1 and verse 3. Lisa? Okay. Got verse 3? I couldn't hear Lisa.
She had verse 4 as well.
Oh, okay, that's what I thought. And Tim, Romans 5, verses 3 to 6.
And not only that, but we also glory in tribulations, knowing that tribulation produces perseverance, and perseverance character, and character hope. Now hope does not disappoint, because the love of God has been poured out in our hearts by the Holy Spirit, who was given to us. For when we were still without strength, in due time Christ died for the ungodly.
Okay. How does, when we think of trials and patience, when we think of worldly things, think of working at home or doing something at home, when we're faced with a problem and whatever we're doing, patience is not easy to come by. Usually we get frustrated and we'll take a shortcut, try and do a shortcut with whatever we're doing. But when we think of spiritual things, how on earth does trials, in your own words, how does trials teach us patience? George?
Well, when you get through whatever you're going through, it makes you a stronger person.
Good point.
And that's similar to exercising,
Yeah.
right? You exercise, you get stronger. It's a trial. Exercise is a trial on your muscles.
Right.
Right? You're going through difficult times at work. When things seem to get better, you feel strengthened. You feel encouraged.
Right. And Jeff?
helps us. But next time, we have when you going back to Gord's exercise thing. If you try to run a marathon without training, you're gonna fail.
Right.
Like as far as your body's not trained to do that.
Right.
But you build up. You work through. You start with a little exercise, and you keep building on that. And as your body gets used to that, then all of a sudden you have endurance to do more. Your body has built up. Whereas if you never train, you're never going to be able to run, or you're not going to be able to do whatever it is. If we want other analogies, we get stronger, as Gordon said, through trials because when it comes to spiritual things, our faith has something to draw upon. We've made it before.
Yeah.
And so we can do it again.
Right.
And we can keep building.
That's a part of the learning, isn't it? And there should be rejoicing on our part. When we've learned to be patient, when we've seen the lessons learned from that, then we need to rejoice in ourselves. And as you say, it prepares us for the next experience, doesn't it? And then in Galatians chapter 6, 3 and 4. Have you got that, Casey?
For if anyone thinks himself to be something when he is nothing, he deceives himself. So let each one examine his own work, and then he will have rejoicing in himself alone, and not in another.
Okay, I think I jumped ahead of us there, but what do you see there as far as the trials and the value of them? I just kind of said it in my last thoughts. Is it not that we should rejoice in ourselves, that we've endured? And sometimes we have to be careful and separate the thought of pride and the thought of rejoicing in ourselves, because God tells us to rejoice. Right in verse 4, rejoicing in himself. Sure.
I think it kind of portrays the idea of being humble, humility. Right? Yeah, you can be happy for yourself. You don't have to go and express it to the world and make yourself look like you're pompous or something like that.
Right. We see the two different attitudes. We're told rejoice in himself, or rejoice in ourselves. Blasting it out and having an arrogant attitude in front of others, that's where the difference comes. And Danny?
It's developing confidence.
Yes.
When you recognize that you were able to succeed or overcome, then that helps us be more confident and doesn't be arrogant. That's recognizing that, yeah, I can do this, but I am able to overcome.
Exactly. Yeah, that's a good point. Because our goal is to receive our reward. And there's, you become downtrodden and giving up attitude, then you're going to lose out on our reward. But yes, rejoicing in ourselves, as Tammy pointed out, it makes you more confident, prepares you, and it energizes you. Because Satan's not going to let up on us at all. And he's going to, if we get over one test, then he's going to present another one.
When we do these things secretly, God will reward us.
Good point, Lord. Yeah.
Right? It's almost the opposite of what the Pharisees were doing. They were doing it openly so they can get glory from everybody else, but not seeking God's glory.
Right. Right. And he tells us to pray, to seek that strength, doesn't it? And he tells us that he will. There's a couple thoughts in here good for lessons that he'll grant us more grace. The more we overcome the challenges that Satan presents to us, the more we see God's grace, the more we value what he gives to us. So, okay, well, we'll move along then. Now, the Christian's attitude towards trials of faith should involve a few things. Okay? Our first one is 1 Peter 4. 1 Peter 4 verses 15 to 16. Sandy, I'll give you that one. 1 Peter chapter 4 and verse 15 and 16.
If anyone suffer as a Christian, let him not be ashamed, but let him glorify God in his
Okay. I thought I'd first point us out to when we think of results and consequences. Let's first think about sin. Okay, the results and consequences of sin can linger for a lifetime. That's just how sin works. Now, the trials that arise from those sins, they're simply just the consequences of those sins. I think of my reckless youth and the consequences of that time in my life are never going to go away. But they can't be confused with trials of faith now. Okay, they're two different things. If you look at Matthew 5, Matthew chapter 5 and verses 10 to 11, we read something here that speaks of rejoicing. Blessed are those, Jesus says, who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are you when they revile and persecute you and say all kinds of evil against you falsely for my sake. The word blessed there means, the happiness of. It means happiness. To live righteously in an ungodly world, we're going to be ridiculed. And we know in some countries we're going to suffer physically. And we're told that in 1 Timothy 2 and 12. But we are to rejoice over that. George?
Well, look at our perfect example, Jesus. Right? He was betrayed, he was spat upon, he was beaten. All kinds of falseness was charged against him. And he hung on the cross and died.
Yeah.
Did he revile back? No. He went as a sheep to the slaughter.
Right.
Or lamb to the slaughter.
Right. That's right. Which brings out my point of exactly, and we're to be Christ-like, aren't we? We're to do our best.
They say old saying, sticks and stones may break your bones, but beams will never hurt you.
Right.
Right. I'm sure we can verbally take abuse from anybody.
Right. We say that.
That's the least we can do.
Right.
Because words can't really harm somebody.
Yes, exactly. We used that line when we were kids, if we can think back. And we really did want revenge. But that's a thought too, that that's allowing that trial not really to have its best result on us, is it? We're saying that, but we don't really mean it, you know. But now, how we handle the trials is Christ-like, like Gord was pointing out then. And Psalms, I had Psalms 119, and verse 172 written down here. I'm not sure why I had that. My tongue shall speak of your word, for all your commandments are righteousness. Just simply, I think the point there I had in thought was that God's trials are for our good, our trials, spiritual trials, and they show our faithfulness. And this verse can help us with our attitude towards abuse, because it will come. Remember 1 Timothy 2 and 12. We're going to suffer. We're going to be Christ-like. We're going to suffer. There's no point in hoping that we can avoid suffering and trials, because it's not going to happen. And that's another way to, I guess we studied that when we looked at 1 John, or studied 1st, 2nd, and 3rd John. The purpose of all that, of trials, is that we can show God our love for Him. And also then, trials should involve, we'll try and get through this because next Sunday's the gospel meeting. The Sunday after, Tammy and I are at the West End, so it'll be 3 Sundays. But the other thought then is that trials should involve never murmuring or complaining. And our next lesson is on murmuring and complaining, so I thought we wouldn't spend too much time there. But 1 Peter 1 and verse 7. 1 Peter 1 and verse 7. Annie, I'll give that to you when you find it. 1 Peter 1 and verse 7. And that, I'll get you to look up Romans 5 and verse 3. So Annie, you've got 1 Peter 1 and verse 7. Okay, genuineness or proof of our faith in this verse is shown and helped by how we look at our trials, how we face our trials. We've kind of been talking about that all along, what we think of them. And next verse, Romans 5 and verse 3.
And not only that, but we also glory in tribulation, knowing that tribulation produces perseverance.
Okay. The reward for how we handle our trials will be given to us when Christ returns. And as I thought of both those verses, that sometimes we look for an escape now. We might, Lord, I've had enough trials. I'm being faithful. And then we want maybe a little relaxation now. Well, we can't think like that, because we'll lose our faith. Our reward will be when Christ comes again. And just in case You go, Gord, in case you.
Yeah, it's just like anything in life. You want the short of life or the long of life. We're playing the long game. We're playing for the reward at the end of our lives, not the short term gains.
Right.
It's like when we're competing in the race. You can't win the prize till you finish the race, right? And the First Peter, what we just read in verse 9, it says, "Receiving the end of your faith, the salvation of your souls." There's our prize, right there.
Right.
At the end.
Right. That's right. So we must endure and keep enduring. And Christ is the example of that, isn't it? Well, I think that was the second bell. Oh, that was first bell? Well, then we'll just sum up quickly then. We should glory then, really, and rejoice in our trials, remembering that the immediate effect, if you think back, when we made the commitment to follow Christ, how did we feel when we made that commitment? Did we not rejoice in that? Did we not feel different than we felt thus far in our lives? And that was because we're now justified in God's eyes, aren't we? And sometimes we need to go back to that time. Sometimes we need to remember how it was in order to handle what we're faced with as we go along. Because trials don't become easier. And then the last thought was simply that there's no exemption from them. We knew that. But this point was, think it not strange, okay, that we have trials. We'll just end with the three of the thoughts, as I think this is important. 1 Peter 1 and 12 and 9. For 12 to 19. Well, we won't read all that, but the thought here is we can't think it's strange that we're being tried. We've given God our lives. We've turned ourselves over to Him. We've left our sins behind us. And so do we tend to think, well, why am I being tried now? Why do I have to face these trials? But if you think of the New Testament Christians, the persecution that they endured, and we're not really told a lot of times what they suffered, but it was severe. And they pulled through looking to that goal. We'll end, Gord, with your
Just
thought.
one quick last thought. Everybody will go through trials in life. There's no exceptions. So why not go through trials in a godly way and get the reward
Right.
at the end?
Right. That's perseverance, isn't it?
I'm not